Good morning, students. Hope all of you are fine. Beta, in this lecture, we will start chapter 11 of history, and name of this chapter is the National Movement First Phase. So, beta, in this chapter, basically, we will study about that how there was the rise of nationalism in India, how people united against the colonial, or we can say the British rule. So, there were various reasons behind that. Just because of that, there was a rise of nationalism. So, into today's lecture, we will just discuss all these topics in detail. As we know, the second half of the 19th century led to a political awakening among the people. There was a growth of national consciousness, and a new kind of movement took shape, led by the Indian National Congress. As you know, beta, Indian National Congress, it was set up in 1885, and soon it became a mass struggle for independence. Beta, here mass struggle means when the people from all the social categories, like men, women, or despite they are related to any caste or religion, they participated in the national movement. That is why now the national movement, it became a mass struggle for independence. So the very first topic is the rise of nationalism. Now, how there was the rise of nationalism among Indian people? As we know that you have read in chapter 6 the Great Uprising, that was about the revolt of 1857. So there were few reasons for the failure of that revolt, because during that revolt, during that first war of independence, there was no national leader. And the other reason was that then the people, they just fought for their own territories, not for the country. But now this time, when we are talking about this time, the late 19th century, then there was a rise of nationalism among people. Now people wanted freedom for whole country, not for any single territory. So let us start this topic. So this is rise of nationalism. The strengthening of a common national identity gave rise to an organized national movement in India. It was national in character, as it represented the aspiration of the Indian people as a whole. Like I was telling you, now people united against the colonial rule, and their aspirations, those were also same. People started looking beyond their regional boundaries and thought of India as a single nation. Now they just came up from their regional as well as any kind of religious boundaries, and they just came together. With this growing sense of unity came the feeling of nationalism. Now, what are the factors that contributed to the rise of nationalism in India? As you know, beta, the very first factor here it is given, that is the discontent against British rule. It means dissatisfaction against British rule. As you know that every category of Indian people, they were exploited as well as ruined by the colonial government. We can take the example of peasant, we can take the example of artist, we can take the example of handloom or any other textile industries. So all these people, they were ruined. Even the peasants, they were forced to grow the cash crops, right? So that is why every category of Indian people, they were dissatisfied against the British rule. Like we have read how the British exploited India. All sections of society suffered under British rule. Like the peasant had to pay the high taxes whether there is good harvest or not. The artisan was ruined by foreign competition. The factory workers received very low wages, and working hours were very long. The British made no attempt to encourage agriculture and industry. They treated India as a source from where raw material could be obtained cheaply and the market which could absorb the British good. As we know, British colonial government, it just used to buy raw material from India and then dump the finished goods in India. So it was just a market for them. Employment opportunities for the educated Indians were limited. India was made to pay for the upkeep of the British army and for the wars that Britain fought. As you know, like the First World War and the Second World War, there also Britain participated. And do you know, from the England side, Indian soldiers also fought that war, and all that expenses were borne by India. So this way, there was the steady drain of India's wealth. Means there was a continuous drain of India's wealth. Due to that, it increased poverty in India. And frequent famines were an indication of this poverty. And do you know, beta, whenever there were any these type of natural calamities were there, colonial government didn't concern about that. With that, the attitude of superiority adopted by the British was also disliked. Like these British people, they thought themselves superior and the Indian people inferior. The British considered themselves a superior race and the Indians as belonging to inferior one. Certain hospitals and parks were reserved for Europeans. In trains, some compartments were reserved for the white people, and even Indians were not allowed to travel in them. All these factors resulted in growing opposition to British rule. So this way, all Indians, they were against the British rule and they united themselves, and this way there was a rise of nationalism. Now the next point is political, administrative and economic unification of the country. As you know, if we talk about the pre-British time, at that time India was divided in different princely states, or we can say there were different kingdoms in India. But under this colonial rule, India was unified under British rule as one unit. There was the central administration. The British introduced a uniform system of governance throughout the country. Laws, at least in theory, were uniformly applied to all. Economic life in India became interlinked after the introduction of modern industries. People from all parts of the country worked in these industries, like textile industries were set up, iron and steel industries were set up, and in these industries people just came from faraway places to work over there. So by working and traveling together, caste, community and regional feelings began to weaken. Beta, when you come closer to each other, then you just harmony is created among the people. So a feeling of solidarity and togetherness developed. The railways, telegraph and postal system helped people to come in contact with one another. Like there were these better means of transportation as well as the new means of communication. Now all these helped people to come in contact with one another, and people started realizing that British rule was responsible for their suffering. This anti-British feeling was a major factor that contributed to the rise of nationalism. Now the third point is the spread of modern education. The spread of modern education also helped in the rise of nationalist feeling. Beta, actually the modern education, it was introduced by the British to prepare some Indians to work at low post in the administration. Like for the clerical jobs, they just wanted to prepare Indian people. The British also believed that if Indians were exposed to Western thoughts and ideas, they would become supporters of British rule in India. But things were turned out, things were different. The British expected that since educated Indians would be dependent on them for employment, they would always remain loyal to them. But things were not like that. What was the expectation of the British? Even exposure to the Western ideas made people more conscious of their rights. They were impressed by the ideas of freedom and equality, popularized by the American and the French Revolution. Beta, about this French Revolution, you will study in class 9. So now Indian people, they were highly impressed by these revolution, like how people of America and France, they revolted and they got independence. They began to criticize the government for suppressing these ideas in India and denying the basic human rights to Indian. The English language acted as a unifying factor because people from different parts of India speaking different languages could now communicate with one another through a common medium. So now English became the language of common medium also. So this way also there was, just because of the spread of Western education, now there was a rise of nationalism in India. Now the next point is, that is the role of the press. As you know, print media always play a very significant role to create any kind of awareness. So the Indian press played an extremely important role in strengthening national consciousness. The newspaper of the period highlighted the anti-Indian policies of the British government and asked the people to unite and work for a common cause. Both the English and the vernacular press became a medium to mobilize public opinion and create a feeling of national bonding. But a vernacular means the regional language. The government tried to suppress the growing feeling of nationalism and patriotism by banning these newspapers and books. But it didn't succeed. It didn't succeed in this. And even this was about the newspaper and magazine. Even the works of other scholars and writers like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Rabindranath Tagore, Subramaniam Bharati, Bhartendu Harishchandra, others were also important in arousing the national consciousness. Their essay, fiction, and patriotic poetry developed self-confidence in the masses. As you know, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, he wrote our national song. Rabindranath Tagore wrote our national anthem, and even of Bhartendu Harishchandra, so many poems you can find in your Hindi textbooks, right? So this way, the Indian press played a very important role in arousing the national consciousness. Now, the other factor is that we can say the immediate factor. By the 1870s, the spirit of national identity had taken deep roots in the minds of the people. The policies of the Viceroy Lord Lytton intensified discontent against British rule. Means few decisions were taken by Viceroy Lord Lytton that increased the discontent against the British rule. He removed import duties on British goods, which ruined the textile industry of India. It means now British goods, those were available in India at a very low cost because they are not to pay any import duties. He made India pay for the war against Afghanistan. In 1877, when India was suffering from a famine, a lavish imperial darbar was held in Delhi. and a large amount of money was wasted on it. Beta, when a country is under severe famine, so at that time government should take the proper measures for the welfare of the people, but no measure was taken by the colonial government. With that, in 1878, two very important acts were passed by the colonial government, and the first one was the Vernacular Press Act of 1878 that imposed restriction on vernacular newspaper. As people, they were communicating, they were sharing their ideas by their newspaper, those were printed in the regional languages. Now under this act, those newspapers were banned. And the Arms Act of 1878, these forbid Indians from possessing arms, means Indians were not allowed to carry any kind of weapon. Both these acts aroused strong reactions from all sections of society. So, beta, this was the topic for today. Hope all of you have understood this topic, and beta, you will get question answers also. Those are based on all these topics that we have discussed in this lecture. So the question you will get today, those are based on just these topics only, and all the questions are from your book exercises, right? Okay, thank you and have a nice day.